Center for the Study of World Religions, Harvard Divinity School.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 1:30 to 3 o'clock session. You are in the room for Chaplaincy for Psychedelics. Let's get cooking. I am truly so excited for this panel. I get the privilege to moderate it. I gave myself the privilege to moderate it. I'm one of the organizers of this conference, and so I get to, give myself my favorite jobs. All right, here we are. So today's panel will have Lisa Gezon kick us off, and then we'll have Jamie Beachy and Francis Guerriero to follow. Guerriero? Okay. And then Ojo Rapheal to bring us to a close. But first, so Lisa, coming from the anthropology department at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, will be sharing Sacred Substances, Sacred Wounds, the intersection of psychedelics, adverse religious experiences, and spiritual healing. So welcome, Lisa.
Hey, everyone, thank you. So I'm excited to be talking to you today about the research I've been doing for the last couple of years, exploring the intersections between psychedelics and adverse religious experiences, focusing particularly on religious trauma, which could be defined as pervasive psychological damage resulting from religious messages, beliefs, and experiences. So the research is based on, like I said, 2 years of participant observation in an psychedelic integration group in the Deep South, and it included a focus group and 24 total interviews, 4 of which were from participants that were recruited from Garas, a Christian Psychedelic Society. And so this is just a little outline of where we're going with things. I'm going to start with talking to you about some of the sources of adverse religious experiences. Where did they come from? So this was a common theme that came up. This theme chose me more than me choosing the theme. Talking with people in the integration group, religion came up time and time again. And so some of the negative experiences, they were experienced by people participating in Christian, Buddhist, Muslim, and psychedelic religions or spiritual communities. And I'll give you one example that stands out. One of the sources was sexual abuse and personal violations. And another one was from tensions with religious teachings, and another one was from incongruence between religious teachings and observed behaviors. So let's start with Dave, who was in a situation of sexual abuse. So he was raised Methodist in a small Midwestern farming community. He was a strong believer at a young age and very involved. In high school, he was driving home from an event at the Methodist Youth Fellowship, and he lost control of his car. He was 15 years old, resulting in the deaths of 2 of his classmates who were on the side of the road. Dave was devastated, and his mother sought counseling for him with a family friend who happened to be a defrocked Catholic priest. The former priest began sexually assaulting him under the guise of religious teachings, saying that sexuality is an expression of God's love. This abuse lasted 2 years. Years later, emboldened by this story, the exposure of widespread sexual abuse by Catholic priests, he confronted his abuser, got him fired from his current job, and received an apology from his bishop. But both the traumatic accident and abuse shook Dave's faith, and he didn't go to church for many years. So another example is tension with religious teachings. Many felt confused and bitter and angry over church beliefs that did not make sense or that were a personal affront. Liz grew up Catholic. She became born again and joined a charismatic church at the age of 19. She had a queer relationship many years previously, and she was shunned by her college youth group at the time. She joined what she termed a highly controlling church after college and was kicked out for breaking curfew. She later joined a non-denominational church, and she attended for 20 years, but she left that church about 6 years ago after her son came out queer and the church rejected him. That experience brought up deep grief over what happened to herself and an understanding that neither she nor her child were fully accepted. Another one is from Ben, who grew up conservative Southern Baptist in a small Deep South town. He attended a Christian college, worked as a pastor, and went to a conservative non-denominational Protestant seminary. From a young age, he felt very connected spiritually And his church community was supportive of him, even in hard times, even when he got in trouble with the law. He began questioning religion while he was in seminary. Exposed to different beliefs and orientations, he struggled with the church's stances on LGBTQ and justice issues. And then he was going through a divorce, and he was facing the stress of finding that his struggles with his divorce were both assuaged and exacerbated by the church. On the one hand, they were supportive of him, and on the other hand, they were condemning him for something that he seemed like probably he shouldn't have been condemned for at the end of the day. So it's almost like it puts that sadness and shame and guilt and embarrassment on steroids, makes it way harder than it should be. Ultimately, after his divorce, he was in a deep depression and realized he no longer believed. Jackie, in an incongruence between teachings and observed behaviors. Jackie was raised charismatic, evangelical Christian in Texas, and holds degrees in religion and anthropology. After experiencing psychedelics, she began studying their relationship with religion in a PhD program in California, and returned to her small Texas town after a year. Before she went into the program, she had struggled with her church's rejection of psychedelics, believing that it contradicts God's power to overcome evil and Jesus' teachings of love and compassion. But nevertheless, despite her 30-year friendship with her pastor, she was excommunicated from the church when she told him that she had done psilocybin and ketamine in a clinic. She felt very frustrated, saying, sometimes you just have to ignore the rules and just love people, thereby actually doing the work of Christ. Okay, so where do psychedelics come in? I gave you a little bit of background now. So these people now have had psychedelic experiences, and a lot of people experience a tremendous amount of healing, but not without some challenges. So with Liz went to AA, and psychedelics both helped her heal her resentment and anger towards religion and purge what she called fear-based thinking. She feels that she has a better spiritual life after psychedelics. She said, it's been life-altering for me. There was just so much healing, even without words. So for Dave, the one with the priest, he felt like he had a mystical experience with psychedelics, making the spiritual world feel real. He said, perhaps psychedelics just opened up new neural pathways in my brain. And these new neural pathways have created a profound change. It has been a welcome, healing change. Ben, the former preacher, he saw a therapist who happened to be Christian, who suggested psychedelic assisted therapy. Feeling desperate and isolated, he first tried psychedelics at an ayahuasca retreat. Psychedelics helped him shift out of his depression. He explained, I had this very cathartic forgiveness moment where I had a visual image of Christ in that kind of unconditional love. Despite this positive experience, however, he developed severe panic attacks for several weeks. I'll come back to that throughout my analysis. Jackie had some healing, but she also had a frightening experience. She faced challenges integrating a psychedelic experience that really scared her. She described encountering the demon of lust, which troubled her for a long time, very deeply. Unsure if it was a literal demon or processing childhood trauma, she questioned whether psychedelic experiences are actual spiritual encounters or processing things as in a dream, or both. The nature of psychedelic experiences is not simply a philosophical conversation, as it had often felt to me before this. And this raises larger questions of how best to support people through these kinds of experiences. Okay, back to the outline. So I'm going to talk about this, like where do we take this from here, looking at harm reduction on the one hand, but then how do we go beyond harm reduction and take advantage of opportunities for real healing and joy and creativity beyond simply harm reduction? We have to talk about harm reduction. We have to talk about radical listening. That's one of the keys, is really listening to people where they're at, and obviously paying attention to demographic and other factors and how those might affect one's experiences, being really honest with oneself about where one is coming from and trying to look at those sorts of things. Ben had a situation that emphasized how important it is to how potentially negative it can be to be overly invested in someone's religious commitment or spiritual orientation. At his ayahuasca retreat, he was advised to abandon his Christian belief system And he said that was both helpful, it helped release him, but it was also really challenging. He noted when you're in the middle of an identity destabilization, it can create a lot of intense confusion, making long-standing anchors crucial. He wondered if his panic attacks were linked to identity issues related to rejecting Christianity. Okay, so towards spiritual healing beyond harm reduction, one of the things I realized in reviewing all of these is common themes is that all these people had originally positive relationships with religion. And I think that's really important because when we're talking about betrayal, and we're talking about healing, it's healing from something, betrayal from something. And so many had had these positive experiences, suggesting betrayal and a loss of trust, which led to the confusion, resentment, and anger. So I looked at betrayal trauma that involves a loss of trust in interpersonal relationships, and it can be applied to religion as well. Levitt explains that when a trust schema shatters, it affects trust in oneself, others, and often God. Some cases illustrate this. So after his early traumatic traffic accident and before he started seeing the ex-priest, Dave explained that people from his church were trying to help him understand that God works in mysterious ways. He rejected that, thinking if that's how God works, if 2 of my classmates were killed in a car accident returning from church, I want nothing to do with God. Jackie obviously felt betrayed when her friend and pastor rejected her. Liz harbored resentment and anger towards family and church after having been rejected from a place where she had once felt comfortable. Ben was disappointed in the church's lack of acceptance and commitment to justice. He said, we're supposed to be better than that. So belief systems are, and identity are really tightly connected. I think that's one of the things that comes out in this research is that what our belief system is not separate from the rest of our well-being. It's tied to our identity, our social connections, our emotional well-being, and losing them can be devastating. During his panic attacks, after the otherwise very healing psychedelic journey, Ben expressed that sometimes I would actually feel legitimate fear that I didn't believe anything anymore. And because I didn't believe anything anymore, I wasn't going to lead a good life. So Ben himself was the one who brought up this idea of the second naivete, often attributed to Paul Ricoeur. The first naivete is in childhood, characterized by wonder, trust, affirmation. And the second one followed by some sort of a schism, skepticism, and doubt. And then a second naivete then consists in overcoming both states and creating new meaning. And so this can be applied to the religious journey. Ben said that since his last journey, he'd been back to church and he actually felt less shame about himself at church. This was during his panic attacks. He said, probably psilocybin opened my heart and I feel this more generous, gracious spirit, you know? And I don't know if I consider myself a religious person. Christianity was my home for so long that I feel at least right now more open to it. Some found their path squarely within their faith tradition. After the birth of his first child, Dave started attending the UCC church, inspired by an uncle and the values of openness and inclusivity. Liz attends a Methodist church, and she sees Jesus' words differently now since her psychedelic experiences. I feel more of an understanding of being undivided from God. She feels she's no longer affected by the church's leadership and their opinion of her. She said, I trust myself. And I know that I will have the answers that are right for my life. Krista, this is the first you're seeing Krista, followed her own spiritual path, but not through Christianity or any other organized religion. She said, part of my journey was to push away completely from what I was taught to be true as a kid and to question everything. What I understand now, after having psychedelic journeys, is that Jesus lived in the vibration of total love, radical acceptance of people. So these stories of reconciliation and opportunities for creativity in a second naivete, they demonstrate what can kind of come out after a struggle and healing from spiritual traumas. They point to some of the unique dynamics that might be considered in the context of chaplaincy or churches in working with people who've had adverse religious experiences, like say the need to take seriously and support inquiry into the very nature of psychedelic experiences. The recognition of the importance of religious identity to overall well-being, the vulnerability of people to these powerful belief systems and their leaders, the pitfalls of overly prescriptive religious and spiritual leadership, social isolation from feeling outside of the doctrine of one's chosen faith tradition, and the opportunities to find joy and healing for self and renewed or new community ties. So this is where I'm having some fun with a beyond harm reduction, somewhat whimsical, although coming here and talking with people, it sounds like some of these things are happening already. So that's kind of exciting. So looking at ritual containment and the resacralization, how can we go simply from baseline healing, right, to taking it into something new that might meet people where they're at in this second naivete place? People's relationships with religion change throughout their life. And this opens up anthropological and applied questions about the potential of ritual as a framework for that resacralization process. In some cases, before, during, and after psychedelic journeys. Talk-based psychedelic preparation and integration help oriented and potentially shift and transform the stories we tell. Talk therapy is great. In Christian settings, reinterpreting biblical texts, as does Jamie Clark Souls, can be really powerful. But also adding other sorts of factors might be really helpful. Adding the material, the symbolic, the behavioral, the linguistic elements, moving our bodies, saying words, being together in community, dancing, singing. Maybe this stuff can help in that, help us find space and creativity in that. So Roy Rappaport, in his essay on the obvious aspects of ritual, argued that the relative invariability of rituals, sequences of acts, utterances, and symbols gives rise to a socially and morally grounded notion of the sacred. Participating in religious contexts connects private and public experiences, sometimes achieving for the performers a state of communitas, or that's attributed to Durkheim, or deep social connection. Tanya Lorman, in her analysis of how God becomes real to evangelical Christians, examines how rituals imbue experience with meaning, suggesting collective interpretations of private experiences. Deeply felt religious experiences can also change people by altering how they attend to their own mental processes. In many contexts, social contexts throughout history, rituals around psychedelic use reinforce sacred and social bonds. Michael Winkelmann's forthcoming book on the Handbook of Entheogenic Healing highlights similarities and some differences in psychedelic rituals across cultures, noting their evolved psychosocial effects. They tend to involve encounters with spiritual beings and embodiment through music, song, and dance, often with pre-ritual deprivations such as fasting. So what might these kinds of things look like for us? I'm not quite ready for that slide yet. What might this look like for us? The participants in the integration group that I studied tend to incorporate some New Age type elements like music and candles, crystal, sage, oracle cards. And while they journey by themselves, oftentimes they come together to the integration group and talk about them, thereby creating a localized subculture of psychedelic use. What might this look like in an organized religious kind of setting? Well, I had my friend Hunt Priest, who is the founder of Ligare Christian Psychedelic Society, and he had some great suggestions. He said, what about using Lent or Advent to prepare for set intentions for a journey, or Easter as a time to think about new birth, or All Saints Day to intentionally connect with ancestors? I thought those were compelling ideas. So that's something I want to leave for us to talk about. And I think some of those kinds of things are happening right now in some religious circles. So let's think about so psychedelics are happening in context. And let's think about what kind of potential they might have to reconnect people with communities, and what kind of potential there is even beyond individual healing and localized community healing towards a bigger question of what kind of social healing might these lead to if used intentionally for that purpose, because we know that that's not an inevitable outcome. Nicholas Powers just wrote this book, Black Psychedelic Revolution, where he wrote that the psychedelic renaissance becomes the psychedelic revolution when it serves and becomes available to the multiracial working class and can address trauma and bring forth a new human world. So he suggested something that I thought sounded kind of fun. What if we went from individual sessions to group sessions at Madison Square Garden, the African Burial Ground in Central Park? provocative. Let's think about it. So in some, psychedelics show great potential. They also show there's a lot of cautions. Some of the cautions I presented in there. It's not a magic fix-all solution. And we have to pay ethical attention, not only to the relationship between the participants and the leaders, but also to the kinds of challenging experiences people can have and how to attend to those. And so I want to lead with the analysis is not merely descriptive. Everything we're doing here is performative and even political in suggesting that psychedelics can play a role in healing religious wounds. May all of us involved in these conversations make a positive difference by documenting and discussing openly and ethically the challenges and benefits of psychedelics. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. And if this got you intrigued, oh my gosh, I want to hear more from Lisa. Check out on the CSWR YouTube channel an event we did called The Curious Case of Integration, where Lisa shares some more of her work there, along with her books and research elsewhere. Anthropology of Drugs, a great read. Next, we have Jamie Beachy, Francis Guerriero, and Wael Garas, who will be presenting Expectancy and Hope in MDMA-Assisted Therapy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to Lisa and Lori and the other panelists for joining me and Francis today for this discussion. I'm really honored to be here to speak with you today. And I can't see everyone in the group there, but I feel your presence and engagement with this topic of spirituality and psychedelic assisted therapy and chaplaincy. So we'll go ahead and begin here. So our objective is to explore the role of expectancy and hope in MDMA-assisted therapy in particular, with implications for future spiritual health research. And just quickly to introduce myself to you, I'm a field scholar with the Emory Center for Psychedelics and Spirituality, an ethics consultant and a spiritual health clinician, certified professional chaplain. I'm a study therapist on the MDMA-assisted therapy phase 3 trials and a Lykos training consultant. I was faculty co-founder of Naropa University's Center for Psychedelic Studies, chair of the board of directors for the Chacruna Institute. I participated in the Colorado Natural Medicine Health Act implementation, so interested in the regulated use model and decriminalization as well. And lastly, I've benefited from economic and academic privilege. I identify as interreligious, post-Christian, and I'm a former Mennonite and UCC minister living in Chromo, Colorado. So I'll hand this over to Francis to introduce himself, and then we'll launch into this topic.
Thanks, Jamie. Hey, folks, good to see you all. Really delighted to be here. So I am currently an outpatient psychotherapist in private practice here in Cambridge, and was one of the therapists on the phase 3 trial of MDMA for PTSD. My background is in ministry and chaplaincy by way of tradition of Vedanta. And I was a priest in that tradition for 10 years prior to becoming an existential psychotherapist. So I like to say that my spiritual formation is in Vedanta, and my clinical formation began in clinical pastoral education. That's where my passion for the counseling arts started. I teach local colleges at classes in psychedelic assisted therapy, and I train along with my team here in Boston, local clinicians in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, and supervise there as well. And I have benefited immensely from being a white male in this society, cisgendered, and these days interreligious. And I will hand it over to Jamie for the first 10 minutes of this.
Beautiful. So a little bit about the context that we're speaking from. So the MDMA-assisted therapy trial that we are referring to here was a trial for serious and severe PTSD, investigating MDMA for PTSD. And PTSD affects individuals and communities globally, with marginalized groups really disproportionately impacted. PTSD is associated with increased in mood, anxiety disorders, substance abuse, suicidal ideation, and suicide attempts. So there's a sense of urgency among PTSD researchers because of the broad scope of the challenges that people with PTSD face. And MDMA-assisted therapy for treatment-resistant PTSD shows promise, but faces challenges, including FDA concerns about expectancy bias, which we'll be talking about in detail today. So the 2024 FDA decision on this, so the LICO-sponsored phase 3 results demonstrated that over 2/3 of participants no longer met criteria for PTSD after the trial. Yet the FDA delayed approval, citing methodological and safety concerns, including positive expectancy bias among participants, challenges in maintaining blinding in clinical trials, potential for increased abuse potential, and also concern about spiritual imposition. And this was expressed mostly by activists that were opposing the approval of MDMA therapies. And our position here is that there is a role for spirituality in psychedelic research, but that, that would need to be evidence-based and also really grounded in best practices. And so we'll get into that here in just a moment. So here's a little from the New York Times on the FDA decision in August, if you want to read more about it. So expectancy and blinding is considered by some as a hard problem in psychedelic research. Blinding challenges include the intense subjective effects that make true blinding difficult. So in essence, functional unblinding occurs when the study participants infer the treatment allocation, so they know which treatment they've received. And I think it was over 90% of those in the treatment arm had a sense that they knew they had received the MDMA versus the placebo. And so this could potentially lead to expectancy effects, where participants' awareness of the treatment could strengthen positive placebo effects. And it's important to note that cultural optimism or hype, which Yaden and colleagues wrote about in 2022, might contribute to expectancy bias in psychedelic research. And in the Lycos trials, this wasn't part of the investigation. And so Francis and I certainly recommend exploring this, in research trials moving forward. So expectancy is really a belief in a specific conditional outcome, and that has potential, again, to bias the results. And I would say the belief in a specific outcome could be a positive or negative belief, which is interesting to note. I think the concern is mostly about positive expectancy bias, but Francis and we were speaking about this along with Wael, Garas, our third author on the paper, who's not here with us today, but contributed a lot of the material for this talk. Note that many of our participants really came in with a negative expectancy bias, meaning that they had tried, all other kinds of PTSD therapies, and this was sort of a last attempt to receive help and support. And so it'd be interesting to see in the study, how many of the participants came in with positive versus negative expectations. But hope, which we really want to spend time with here today, is a broader, enduring, existential, and relational resource that is distinct from expectancy and isn't always separated out in the ways that researchers are approaching this question. And hope is grounded more in resilience, meaning-making, and agency, drawing from spiritual, existential, religious, and theological sources. And it's really not dependent on a specific outcome, which we'll get into here. And our argument in the paper and in this talk today is that there's really an ethical imperative in clinical research to consider hope as distinct from expectancy, and actually to support participants in any human research trial in reconnecting with and supporting that deeper sense of hope and resilience. So to get into hopelessness and trauma, in the particular context of trauma, Psychological definitions of hope tend to focus on agency, meaning the motivation to act, and pathways to goals. And there's some recognition of the role of hopelessness for psychological health. So you can see the Beck hopelessness scale, which I think is used in palliative care, perhaps palliative care research. But there's an existential and spiritual dimension of hope that is implied maybe in these psychological definitions, but often not made explicit by psychiatric and psychotherapeutic models. And what we mean by this is that trauma really may disrupt the existential, spiritual, and religious meaning making and belonging, as well as agency and these pathways to goals. Hopelessness might be experienced as alienation and this liminal space of suspension. That's more than just a psychological space, but it's kind of a spiritual or an existential phenomenon. And then also moral injury, certainly wasn't considered in the Lycos trial, but came up for many of our participants as an existential crisis that has deeper roots than just a psychological experience. And so what about hope? Reverend Dr. Howard Thurman, who was the dean of Marsh Chapel at Boston University from 1953 to 1965, was a mentor to MLK Jr. and a philosopher of radical nonviolence. And this is a very, brief nod to his work. But for Dr. Howard Thurman, hope is a connection with divine presence that transforms despair into action for justice and reconciliation. And again, it's not reliant on an outcome, but it's more of an inner sense of affirming life and affirming one's dignity. Viktor Frankl, another writer who affirms hope that is, even in the direst of circumstances, was a humanist philosopher and survivor of the Jewish Holocaust. For Frankl, hope is about meaning and purpose, and sustains this defiant power of the human spirit to endure suffering with resilience, again, even in the direst of circumstances. So these approaches to perspectives on hope are not in any way reliant on an outcome, but are more of a sense of enduring and sustaining one's dignity, purpose, and sense of meaning. Angel Kyoto Williams is a Zen Buddhist teacher who writes of hope as not a guarantee of a better future, but an active, engaged practice rooted in personal and collective responsibility. And from the native tradition of North American community, Professor Patty Lowe is a citizen of Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Ojibwe. She highlights the seventh generation philosophy, which is a commitment to considering how actions may affect 7 generations, some 240 years into the future, that supports resilience and courage. And so this sense of belonging to something greater than oneself as a way of thinking about hope as distinct from expectation of a particular outcome. So before I hand it over to Francis, I'll just share a case from my own experience in the MDMA trial of a veteran who struggled with guilt and this sense of a lack of the future after surviving while his fellow soldiers did not make it alongside him through a really intense battle experience. And he experienced this as a crisis of faith and a crisis of his own relationship to his moral convictions, his religious sensibility, his commitments, his understanding of himself within his community. And through the MDMA therapy, he experienced a reduced fear response and this open pathway for reevaluating his traumatic memories. And through the relationship with his co-therapists and through the MDMA protocol, he rediscovered hope and this sense of the future, and also a sense of re-belonging to his community and his beliefs and his convictions, his sense of morality. And this for him had to do a lot with his ancestry. So his ancestors showed up in the sessions, and he really regained the sense of spiritual support. And it's important to note that for this particular veteran, PTSD was not resolved, but his hope was restored as this sense of reconnection with his sources of belonging, his sense of having permission to move into the future, feeling like his moral convictions and his sense of responsibility and guilt had a container and had a sense of meaning and purpose, so that he could move forward to receive, additional resources and training moving into the post MDMA period of his journey. And we would have liked to have cared for him longer, but the MDMA trial, didn't allow for that. And so I send my gratitude to him for all that he taught me and for the time that we had together, as I hand this over to Francis.
Thanks, Jamie. We're doing this hybrid thing, so bear with us. I'm gonna let Jamie know when to move the slides forward. In this next section, we're gonna have some ethical considerations, recommendations, and talk a bit about what is the ground of this hope. And here I'll sort of pepper in one of the clients I worked with in MDMA-assisted therapy. The Benedictine monk, Brother David Steindl-Rast, now in his 90s, defines hope as openness to surprise and a passion for the possible. A fun story is before MDMA was scheduled, Rick Doblin sent a bunch of it to Brother David Steindl-Rast, who had done a lot of interreligious dialogue, Christian, Buddhist. And Brother David gave it to the monks in the monastery. And the report back was these monks experienced profound states of mindfulness, of present moment awareness with full acceptance and a deep sense of self-compassion. So when it comes to, did we lose? Okay, there we go. So oftentimes as a clinician, it occurs to me that I'm being hired to hold the hope, that people have lost it. And part of my job is simply to hold it until they can take it back. So the question is, on what grounds do I bring that hope to the therapeutic situation? Right? And this is where the inner healing intelligence comes in. And this we're putting forward as a kind of unifying concept of most psychotherapies and a holistic aspect of psychotherapy. The inner healing intelligence is something all people have. Everyone in this room's got it. You think of it as an innate capacity for post-traumatic growth, for healing. MDMA, in its experiential traits, is essentially an enhancing bridge, an experiential bridge to this state, so that one knows it directly for themselves. And this is, of course, consistent with this hope as resilience. Next slide. Next, yeah. So here are some examples of psychotherapy. You could basically drill any of these authors and extract a kind of phenomenology of this innate healing capacity. Rogers called it an actualizing tendency. Authentic self, said Winnicott. And each emphasizes our innate capacity for growth, resilience and transformation. Next slide. This is just the same thing put forward, not by naming the authors, but by the therapeutic modality that some of you may recognize if you speak therapy-ese. Part of what we're saying here is that this implicit thing is kind of an article of faith on the part of the clinician. It's not a belief, we trust in this capacity in the client. And it's that trust, that confidence, that faith that we bring to the situation that may allow them to now resonate with that possibility within themselves and attempt to cultivate that, to broaden and build that resiliency. Next slide. I've drawn out here Dr. Richard Schwartz's internal family systems version of this, which he calls self or self-leadership. And I do this because his is one of the more explicit kind of trait characteristics that when one is in this and having a direct experience of this self-energy, they're calm and clear, they're curious, wide open, interested. They feel a deep sense of kindness, gentleness, tenderness, compassion for themselves. And they have a trust in themselves and what needs to happen next for their own healing. In the MDMA trials, we watched this happen before us. We weren't planting it or indoctrinating people. We were trusting it was there and then watching it animate. A client that I'd like to refer to is a gay man in his 60s who had a very challenging childhood and lost his mother at 17 in a very difficult way. And a common story, had a breakdown. He's a young adult. And then after that, suffered the AIDS epidemic, where he lost many, many beautiful people in his life. And in his MDMA session, he said, "I'm fully here. I've never been so here," stating this sense of presence, this mindful presence. And he depicted the state in our integration sessions as a wise love, a knowing that was not the mind. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I just trusted myself completely. Next slide. So as Jamie pointed out, there's an existential and therefore spiritual dimension to PTSD, which is a profound state of mistrust, of existential mistrust. The ground in our perspective on the world, much less other people, is challenged immensely. And therefore, therapeutic integration requires spiritual, existential, religious experiences be integrated, and that therapist should really have some training in dealing with spiritual experiences. This particular client that I mentioned had a beautiful experience where he, in his vision, saw both his deceased mother and all of these beautiful men who had died before him, and they were on the fecund land of his heritage. And he said, "I blessed them and they blessed me." It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of grief work. Next slide. So what we're advocating is that we want to support hope without fostering unrealistic expectations, feeding into the psychedelic hype. As Lisa said, it's not a one and done. That collaboration, cooperation, continued informed consent always have to be happening, and transparent communication about the investigational nature of this treatment. And we would propose that spiritual health measures be implicated. Next slide. And these are our conclusions. Expectancy and hope are distinct but interconnected concepts in MDMA-assisted therapy research. Hope is a broader existential, spiritual, and/or religious resource that fosters resilience and meaning-making. And ethical practice requires balancing hope and expectancy with rigorous research standards. Thank you all very much.
Thank you both so much. And like Lisa, if you appreciate some of what Jamie shared today, you can find kind of where this conversation started, at least for us at the Divinity School, at an online recording of an event called "What is Psychedelic Chaplaincy?" Now, what, 4 4.5 years ago, something like that. And then a more recent event that is recorded online on the state of psychedelic chaplaincy from late last year. And to conclude our panel today, we have Ojo Rapheal presenting on spiritual care, psychedelic chaplaincy, and the African-American churches in Maryland. Let's welcome him.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, let me make some disclaimers. Some persons actually met me earlier before now, and were asking me whether I'm actually a chaplain. The answer is no. That's number one. Then number two, my background is in religion and violent extremism. But recently, I came across this fascinating, development when it comes to mental health. So at the moment, I actually work with a facility that deals with people with mental disabilities. So that actually triggered my interest to see how religion can actually play a major role when it comes to mental disabilities. And shortly after that, I came across the call for paper for this conference. And I think it's quite interesting for me to also launch into that and see how I can connect my experience with this new one. So what we'll be presenting today, it's a work in progress. So it's not a concluded research yet. So we need your contributions and then see how we can make improvement on the work. Thank you so much. So now we'll be starting with this reflection. And to the question we have before us is this: to what extent can spiritual caregivers help congregants who are passing through their psychedelic experiences make sense of their lived experience? Now, the objective of the study, the first one has to do with to examine the roles of spiritual care in African American churches. So in this case, my focus is on Christ Apostolic Church in Maryland, Christ Apostolic Church. So not all the African American churches in Maryland. Then the second one is to explore the perception of psychedelic substances in African American religious contexts. And then the third one is to possibly evaluate the potential for psychedelic chaplaincy in African American church communities and its challenges. Now, I have two major research questions which will guide our discussion this afternoon. The first one is that how can psychedelic chaplaincy be effectively integrated into spiritual care practices within African American churches while acknowledging both cultural and theological traditions and still maintain medical standards? Then the second one is, what are the potential benefits and challenges of incorporating psychedelic assisted practices into spiritual care in African American religious communities? Now, here's the background. We all know that this is an emerging field that has to do with, deploying psychedelics into handling issues, especially from among members or congregants that are passing through some psychedelic experiences. And this is something that along the line, you will see what I've actually come across while relating with some chaplains and some clergy. It will be so shocking that some chaplains, as we speak today, know nothing about psychedelic chaplaincy. So to the extent that some of them felt that this is somehow strange, or as if we're bringing in something that does not even exist in the first place. So two, within the African context, or the African American churches now, we'll see that it actually presents both opportunities and then challenges. Opportunities in the sense that if it is something that is not known among those people, do we have the better way to actually take the whole issues to them so that they can be more aware of what happens? Then in the process of taking it to them, what are those possible challenges we might encounter in making them to get to know what is happening? Then historically, among the people, we've seen that there are so many issues that are connected to their own existence in terms of trauma they've actually gone through, in terms of the suppression, in terms of some of those cultural biases and sentiments they actually have. towards certain people or towards governments. And then we also, another thing that we have to consider here is the issue of the compatibility with the cultural belief system of the people and how it all connects. Now, under the methodology, it's an ethnographic study whereby we talk about the lived experiences of those people, and then to see how we can connect their historical trajectories to what happens around them. Now, between last year and now, I was able to interview about 20 clergies. We can refer to them as chaplains. Out of these 20, funny enough, 16 of them knew nothing about what we're discussing now. 4, they have knowledge about it, but they also have their reservation that, oh, this, we've heard about this, we've read about this, but we still have our own reservation, given their own cultural background and given their own world belief. Then what happens to the 16 that knows nothing about it? How are we going to handle that part? So that's the reason why I'm actually looking at this study and see how can we, as scholars, maybe in the field of religion, in the field of clinical sciences, or any other field that is here today, how can we take this message to these people that it can become something that will not just, after the conversation we have here, it will just end here. We want to think of how we can push it forward or further to see that these people are actually incorporated in this and the world can be a better place, especially among the African-American churches around us. Now, the historical context of those people. The first thing is that the people and their worldview, according to J.S. Mbiti, he said that the Africans, that they are incurably religious. Incurably religious in the sense that for everything they do it religiously. So there's no distinction between the sacred space and the secular space. Because to the Africans, they believe strongly that in a settings like this, there is a combination, the presence of the spiritual world in our midst here. So whether you are sick, they believe that that sickness has some religious undertone, some spiritual dimension. So that's why when it comes to healing among the Africans, it is believed that this healing must be a holistic one, the body, the soul, and the spirit. Then the roots of spiritual care among the people, that the church, that's the African-American church now, is such that it's been seen as a place of refuge among the people. Looking at the historical trajectory, they see it as a rally point, not only the spiritual center, but also a place where they have a social gathering, whereby they have sense of hope, sense of belonging, and where they can also easily get support at all times. They see it as a place of empowerment and recovery for Black communities. Then the perception about their healing, which I've just mentioned, as integrative. So they believe that everything has to be a holistic one. Then historically, the church was known for its dual role, which I've mentioned. Then the spiritual care among those people has actually been something that they've taken very seriously from the very beginning. So it's not just something that is starting now. It's something that it's part of them. It's something they know at all times. But now coming to the new dynamics and the new realities when it comes to talking about psychedelic, experiences, how can they translate or move from the old ways of doing things into the new realities and see how they can connect well? That's the issue we have. Then the rise of psychedelic medicine, which we've seen group of scholars and people, associations like John Hopkins University and others coming up with these new positions to see how these can become better among them. Then what are the issues here? The ethical and spiritual concern among the church, because like I said, I have interviewed about 20 persons that are believed to be chaplains or religious leaders or the church leaders. And unfortunately, if out of 20, 16 has no knowledge about this, though even if they have the knowledge, because from what I've gathered, what they know is not what we refer to as a psychedelic experience. What they know could be part of those things that, oh, maybe somebody is being attacked by one demon somewhere or has one ancestral background, issues like that. But what about the issues of trauma, depression, as a result of some of the experiences, the life experiences which they have gone through that are actually not connected to the spiritual dimension? So it raises the issue of the ethical and spiritual concern among the people because they have their own theological question that they want to ask questions about. That if this happens, how can we explain it? Then not only that, the religious perception about life crisis, hinges on the efficacy of prayers, scriptures, and place of the Holy Spirit in the church. So in this case, we've discovered that from my own interaction with them, some of them believe that even if there's anything called psychedelic experiences, it has to be handled strictly by the place of prayer, the scripture, and then the works of the Holy Spirit. Then what about the psychedelic-based therapies? So that again becomes another major issue. Then the place of Christian principles in psychedelic assisted therapies, which is the love, compassion, and support, which this is expected to guide, the deployment of these therapies. But according to some of these pastors or some of these chaplains, they are finding it very difficult to accept. Yes, they know some things, but they are finding it very difficult to see, oh, can we actually embrace this? If we are going to embrace it, what would be the reaction of their members? What would be the interpretation of this? Will they be seen as being syncretic or being, bringing in a new thing that is different from what they are used to? Then the seeking of the divine through psychedelics, the use of some substance. Among the Africans, it is believed that even plants all around, they have their own medical power. But again, one of the challenges from what I gathered during the interaction is this. Some of the plants these people believe in, that they have their potent power to actually heal some diseases, are not present here. Ability to import them, again, has some legal restrictions. Then how then do we bring those things here now that they are not here? So these are some of the issues we came across. Then Africans often use plant-based medicine for healing, which I just mentioned now. Then the growing challenges of mental crisis among the people. I actually work with a facility that has to do with people with mental disabilities. Now, from some of the experiences we've seen so far, there's an increase in these challenges. There's so much, situations we record almost on a daily basis. But now bringing it to these people, the so-called the chaplains, the clergy, they find it very difficult to see how they can actually figure out or connect the reality on ground and to see how they can provide solution. Should we go the way of prayers, the way of the Holy Spirit, and then just the scripture? But from what I've gathered from the beginning of this conference till now, it goes beyond just prayers. It goes beyond Holy Spirit. It goes beyond reading of the scriptures. There are certain things that has to be used. And these people, the way they live their lives is such that they become somehow resistant to these available opportunities. So which has actually become a major issue which we've seen. Then the spiritual caregivers and their willingness or capability to enhance psychedelic assisted therapies. I've just mentioned that. What is the level of their willingness? One thing is for you to know that, yes, you need this. Another thing is for you to accept, to make use of what is available. And then the next one is that the societal stigma and perception. Among the African American churches, with my little interactions, there's a major stigma placed on that part. Psychedelic experience, it's a serious issue. So they don't people find it very difficult to associate with people passing through psychedelic experiences. And that makes it difficult again for clients to trust the process within that system. because the process is not being placed in a situation whereby they can actually trust even those ones who are administering it. Because the person who is administering it does not even believe in it. And that person has found it very difficult to also follow the process the way it should. Therefore, the clients also find it very difficult to trust the process. And then the last one is the legal and the policy, the legal aspect. There's some level of restraint, and which has made it very difficult because so many of them, they're trying to stay away from anything that will bring legal toils on them. Now, what then is the future direction? If we have these issues, if we have these challenges, what are possible future directions that we have? Then the first thing is that to promote enhanced and proper understanding of psychedelic chaplaincy, which we are doing now. And it's not something that must end or to start and end with Rapheal. It must be something that every one of us will have interest in. Now that we know that there's a community of people that do not actually have good knowledge about what we're talking about, then how can we enhance the knowledge? Because after this whole conversation, there could be some publications out of it, right? But beyond the publications, can we take the awareness to them? Can we find a way of connecting? Can we find a way of discussing it or calling for another meeting whereby issues like these will be discussed and the stakeholders will also be part of the conversation? Then formulating the ethical framework. In this case, that clear ethical criteria should be put in place while incorporating it in religious activities. It must be well contextualized for optimal outcome. That is, if we are going to be doing all of this, it must be well situated so that the concerned people will also have a better understanding of what we are discussing. Then establishing secured environments. This is what I'm talking about here, that this will help members with psychedelic experience to trust the process. It will enhance physical, emotional, and spiritual safety, because some of them, to a large extent, they're not too sure if they are safe in the hands of the so-called chaplains. Then the educational aspect of it has to do with the training of the chaplains. Now that a whole lot of them knows nothing about it, then the need for them to be trained is very important. Then addressing cultural sensitivities. Because whether we like it or not, there's no way you can disconnect these people from their worldview. And their worldview has to do with the connection between the spiritual world and the physical world. And at every point in time, whatever that happens, they still refer back to that and see how they can make sense of their own existence. Then integration with established customs. The church established religious rituals like prayers, meditations, and community engagement should also be considered. And lastly, there should be continuous evaluation of situations. Now, in this case, if we must create awareness, the need for continuous evaluation of situations around is there. Do we have improvements? Or don't we have, if there's anything that can be done to ensure that all that we put in place will get the desired outcome, we must continue to evaluate. Then in summary, African American churches, especially Christ Apostolic Church, they are known for their dual roles, the spiritual and also as a rallying point for the members. Two, we've seen that historically, the community is known to have gone through some moments that have affected their sense of belonging. Then the next one is that psychedelic chaplaincy is known as part of spiritual care assignment to be carried out by clergies. But the question is, these clergies, how prepared are they? Or how well informed are they? Then the world view of the people has to do with the integrative system, whereby they believe strongly in the combination of both the spiritual and the physical world. And there are some known societal barriers like stigma, perception, and then the legal policy, and the lack of the resources that could help them to facilitate some of those things. And then the last one is the future direction. There's hope and there's possibility for this to be actually be embraced by this group of people. And then the conclusion is this: psychedelic chaplaincy in African American churches in Maryland provides range of possibilities. Possibilities in the sense that now that we know that a whole lot of them, another way of some of those things, we can take the message to them. We can push the conversation to them so that they can embrace it. Then the challenges is that how well are they prepared to actually embrace these that we're bringing to them? Then the next one is that it provides new pathway to recovery and resilience through its integration into the modern year. And then the last part is that its importance must be emphasized. If we must create that awareness, the importance has to be emphasized, and the future engagement on its recognition, acceptance, and integration should be prioritized through effective awareness creation. Thank you.
cswr.hds.harvard.edu, copyright 2025, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.